The dense fog coils through the dim streets of London as air raid sirens scream in the blackness. It is 1944, the heart of World War II. Amidst the terror and uncertainty, a scene unfolds that seems ripped from another century in Portsmouth. Police officers drag a stout, middle-aged woman from her house. Her crime is not espionage, treason, or any wartime offense. Helen Duncan stands accused of witchcraft, not in medieval Europe, but in modern Britain. While the country battles Nazi forces for survival, its government invokes an 18th century law to silence a Scottish medium whose extraordinary abilities have attracted unwanted attention from the highest levels of authority. This is not merely the tale of a woman accused of supernatural crimes. It's a collision of rational modern governance with the enduring mysteries of the spiritual world. Curious dance between national security and the mystical arts. Helen Duncan, a simple woman with extraordinary claims, became entangled in a conflict that exposed the profound anxiety of institutions faced with forces they could neither explain nor fully control. What was it about Helen Duncan's talents that so disturbed the British government? What knowledge did she possess that elevated her from obscure medium to national threat? Decades later, her case continues to captivate historians, spiritualists, and occult researchers. Helen McFarlane was born on November 25, 1897, in Callander, Perthshire, Scotland. The daughter of a stonemason, she grew up in humble circumstances as spiritualism surged in popularity across Britain. From childhood, Helen exhibited abilities that amazed and frightened those around her. Mediumship is a natural gift, like blue eyes or curly hair, wrote Arthur Conan Doyle, famed creator of Sherlock Holmes, an ardent supporter of spiritualism. Helen seemed to embody this principle, frequently predicting events and describing deceased individuals she had no known connection with. In 1921, at age 24, she married Henry Duncan, a cabinet. Together they raised 6 children, enduring the economic struggles of the interwar years. Financial hardships seemed to encourage Helen to explore her mediumistic skills more seriously. Professor Hans Holzer, a noted parapsychologist, observed that mediumship often flourishes in times of material deprivation, as if suffering thins the veil between the physical world and the unseen. Helen's life appeared to follow this pattern. Around 1926, she began conducting private séances, initially for family and friends. Witnesses described the emergence of ectoplasm, a mist-like substance that appeared to flow from her mouth and body during trances, sometimes forming into recognizable human shapes. What her followers believed to be materialized spirits of the dead. French psychic researcher Gustave Jelly described ectoplasm as the tangible manifestation of the intangible, a physical bridge between the living and the spiritual realms. For many who attended Helen's séances, these manifestations were undeniable proof of life after death. Skeptics, however, saw elaborate deception. The debate escalated when the London Psychic Laboratory invited Helen for examination in 1931. The lab's director, Harry Pricer, well-known skeptic, accused her of fraud, claiming the ectoplasm was nothing more than regurgitated cheesecloth, egg whites, and other materials. Yet, as esoteric philosopher Colin Wilson noted, the boundary between genuine phenomena and fraud is often tenuous in mediumship. Even authentic mediums may resort to trickery when their abilities falter. This ambiguity would haunt Helen's reputation throughout her life. Despite the damaging allegations, Helen retained a core group of loyal supporters who remained convinced of her genuine abilities. Among them was Hannon Swaffer, a respected journalist and spiritualist, who asserted that he had observed inexplicable phenomena during her controlled seances. In 1933, Helen's first serious legal trouble arrived when she was convicted under the Vagrancy Act for fraudulent mediumship and sentenced to 1 month of hard labor. Instead of deterring her, the conviction appeared to embolden her resolve. She continued touring Britain, performing seances for eager audiences in living rooms and public halls. Psychiatrist Carl Jung, in his exploration of paranormal experiences, suggested that the collective unconscious can manifest insights beyond ordinary perceptions of time and space. A possible framework for understanding Helen's abilities. With the outbreak of World War II in 1939, British society plunged into an unprecedented era of fear and loss. Amid bombings, rationing, and uncertainty, a curious revival of interest in the occult swept the nation. Historian Mircea Eliade observed that collective crises often dissolve the barriers between the rational and the mystical, driving people to seek solace in the transcendent. For grieving families, desperate for word from sons, husbands, and brothers lost to the horrors of war, mediums like Helen offered hope that government agencies could not provide a final message. A last farewell, a fragile assurance of continued existence on some other plane. Helen's reputation flourished, and her seances, especially in naval cities like Portsmouth, Southampton, and Edinburgh, drew desperate crowds. But it was in Portsmouth, a strategic Royal Navy base, that her work took a perilous turn. In November 1941, during a séance, a materialized spirit reportedly identified himself as a sailor from the HMS Bahama, British battleship that had in fact been secretly torpedoed by a German U-boat days earlier, resulting in the deaths of 861 men. The sinking of the Barham had not yet been publicly disclosed. The Admiralty had concealed the disaster to maintain morale and deny intelligence to the enemy. How could Helen have possibly known this highly classified information? Dennis Wheatley, an occult novelist and intelligence officer during the war, later reflected that the security of such information was as critical as safeguarding troops. Any leak could have disastrous consequences. Helen Duncan's séance revelations posed a disturbing question for British intelligence. Was this coincidence, fraud, or something far more dangerous? Aleister Crowley, the infamous occultist who occasionally assisted British intelligence, remarked that mediums, like Duncan, were most dangerous not if they were fraudulent, but if they were genuine, capable of accessing knowledge beyond conventional sources, posing a security threat no code could protect against. Beyond the Barham incident, other seances reportedly involved premature disclosures of military operations. In one chilling account, a materialized spirit spoke of a soldier killed during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa B. For official announcements were made. Leslie Flint, another psychic researcher, observed that if such accounts were true, they implied Helen's information could not stem from ordinary channels, suggesting instead a mediumistic access to knowledge untethered by space and time. This deeply unsettled British intelligence services, MI5, already vigilant against enemy spies, began monitoring Helen Duncan closely. Undercover agents attended her seances, documenting every detail. Internal intelligence reports, declassified years later, revealed their growing alarm. One report noted, "Subject continues to reveal classified information with no apparent source." Investigation into possible contacts with naval or intelligence personnel has revealed no significant links. Popularity of seances among military families presents significant security risks. The authorities were caught in a dilemma. No evidence tied her to espionage networks. Yet her apparent knowledge of top-secret military affairs could not be ignored. In 1944, the authorities finally took action against Helen Duncan. During a séance in Portsmouth, police raided the premises, arresting Helen and several attendees. The lights were abruptly switched on, exposing Helen in an alleged trance, while an officer attempted to grab what he described as a white figure that quickly vanished. Initially, Helen was detained on relatively minor charges under the Vagrancy Act, essentially accusing her of pretending to have psychic powers to obtain money. However, as the case progressed, the authorities made a surprising decision. They chose to prosecute Helen Duncan under the Witchcraft Act of 1735. Psychic researcher Maurice Barbanel wrote at the time that the decision to resurrect such an archaic law against witchcraft said more about the desperation of the authorities than about Helen Duncan's actual activities. Unable to explain how she obtained classified information, they resorted to legislation from an era that still believed in pacts with the devil. This decision transformed what could have been an obscure case of fraud into a historic trial that captured the imagination of the British public and raised profound questions about the relationship between the state, science, and the supernatural. In the 20th century, on March 23, 1944, as Allied forces prepared for the imminent invasion of Normandy, an extraordinary legal spectacle unfolded at the Old Bailey, London's Central Criminal Court. Helen Duncan, a robust 47-year-old Scottish woman, stood in the dock accused of violating the Witchcraft Act of 1735, a piece of legislation few legal scholars even realized was still in force. Professor Ronald Hutton, a historian specializing in paganism and witchcraft, noted that the trial of Helen Duncan represented a fascinating collision between modernity and tradition, the age of atomic bombs and radar. A woman was being prosecuted under a law designed for a society that genuinely believed in witches. The prosecution, led by barrister John Maud, did not claim that Helen flew on broomsticks or cast curses. Instead, she was accused of pretending to summon the spirits of the dead, a modern interpretation of an ancient law. Sir Gerald Dodson, the presiding judge, made his position clear from the outset. The court was not concerned with whether the spirits of the dead could communicate with the living, but whether the accused attempted to deceive the public into believing she could. The trial lasted 7 days. An extraordinarily long period for an apparently minor case, especially during wartime. More than 40 witnesses were called, including both supporters and critics of Helen. Among the defense witnesses were respectable individuals who swore they had clearly recognized deceased relatives materializing in Helen's seances. One man described how his late mother appeared and called him by a childhood nickname that only she knew. A war widow recounted how her husband appeared with specific details about his death that she only officially confirmed weeks later. Philosopher C.M. Joad noted that either dozens of people were collectively committing perjury, or our understanding of reality needed to make room for currently inexplicably phenomena. The prosecution focused on discrediting Helen's mediumistic phenomena. A crucial moment came when experts demonstrated how gauze soaked in egg white, once swallowed, could be regurgitated to simulate ectoplasm, a technique Harry Price had accused Helen of using years earlier. Spiritualist physician Dr. Nandorf, who had extensively studied materialization phenomena, later wrote that while some mediums resort to fraud when their powers fail, not all observed phenomena can be explained by such methods. The most compelling cases reported from Duncan's séances involved manifestations that could hardly be replicated by simple sleight of hand. A fascinating dimension of the trial was the authorities' reluctance to directly address national security issues. Although it was widely speculated that the government's real concern was Helen's ability to reveal classified military information, this aspect was never explicitly mentioned during the proceedings. Prime Minister Winston Churchill reportedly referred to the case privately as medieval nonsense. Historian Senu Shamdasani observed that the trial represented a moment when the British legal and military establishment confronted a phenomenon that didn't fit into existing categories of threat. Unable to prosecute her as a spy, since there was no evidence of enemy contact, they turned to an archaic law that offered some mechanism for containing what they perceived as danger. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the case was about far more than the guilt of a single medium. It was a referendum on the limits of scientific knowledge, the relationship between the state and unconventional spiritual practices, and the very nature of reality itself. On April 3, 1944, after only 30 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Helen Duncan was sentenced to 9 months in Holloway Prisoner, surprisingly harsh sentence for a non-violent offense during wartime. The verdict sparked immediate controversy. Maurice Barbanel, editor of the spiritualist newspaper Psychic News, wrote that the British state had declared illegal the fundamental belief of spiritualism that the dead can communicate with the living. Millions of spiritualists now found themselves technically in violation of the law simply for practicing their religion. The Spiritualist National Union organized protests, arguing that the verdict amounted to religious persecution, and a petition with thousands of signatures was sent to the Home Office requesting Helen's release. Helen served her sentence with dignity. According to reports, even the prison guards consulted Helen about deceased loved ones. After her release in 1945, with the war over, she vowed to continue her mediumistic work, a promise she kept until her death in 1956. Paradoxically, the trial that sought to silence Helen Duncan ended up turning her into a martyr for the spiritualist cause and secured her place in history as the last person convicted of witchcraft in England. The case also hastened the repeal of the Witchcraft Act, which was finally replaced by the Fraudulent Mediums Act in 1951, a law that distinguished between deliberate fraud and genuine religious practice. After her release from Holloway Prison, Helen Duncan emerged not only as a free citizen, but as a living symbol of the tension between dominant scientific materialism and enduring esoteric traditions. Far from abandoning her practices, Helen resumed her work with renewed determination. As mystic Thomas Merrin observed, those who have crossed the veil between worlds rarely remain content with purely material perspectives. In the following years, she conducted hundreds of séances across Britain. Ironically, the trial that aimed to discredit her had significantly amplified her fame. Occult scholar Manly P. Hall noted that in the history of esoteric traditions, persecution often serves as involuntary validation. When powerful institutions mobilize against someone claiming access to knowledge beyond accepted paradigms, it suggests that the threat is genuine. In November 1956, during a séance in Nottingham, police once again raided her demonstration. This time, authorities invoked the newer Fraudulent Mediums Act. The pattern of persecution was painfully familiar. Witnesses reported that Helen, in a deep trance, suffered a severe shock when officers attempted to seize the supposed ectoplasm. She suffered internal bleeding and, 5 weeks later, died on December 6, 1956, at the age of 59. At her funeral, renowned journalist and spiritualist Helen Swaffer declared that Helen Duncan gave her life for the truth of spiritualism just as surely as any religious martyr in history. Beyond her personal story, Helen Duncan's case continues to resonate in contemporary esoteric studies for several profound reasons. One unresolved question remains: how did she acquire information she seemingly could not have known? Dr. Dean Radin of the Institute of Noetic Sciences suggests that cases like Helen's compel us to consider non-local modes of information access. Quantum mechanics has shown that particles can be entangled across vast distances. Perhaps consciousness operates under similar principles. This echoes psychiatrist Carl Jung's theories of synchronicity and the collective unconscious as shared repository of memory and experience. Researcher Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphic fields suggests that certain individuals, in altered states of consciousness, may access information fields that transcend conventional limits of time and space. The deepest lesson of Helen Duncan's case may be that the boundaries between the possible and impossible, the natural and supernatural, are not fixed but culturally and historically contingent. Philosopher Michel Foucault noted that every era has its regime of truth, systems of power that sanction certain types of knowledge while relegating others to obscurity. In that context, individuals like Helen Duncan serve as liminal figures, occupying spaces between conceptual worlds and pointing to possibilities our dominant paradigms struggle to accommodate. Decades after her death, as fields like quantum physics, consciousness studies, and anomaly research continue expanding our understanding of reality, Helen Duncan's extraordinary case remains a powerful reminder of the mysteries still at the heart of human experience. As the occultist Dion Fortune once wrote, "Magic is the art of causing changes in consciousness according to will." Perhaps Helen Duncan's true legacy lies not in her supposed gift of speaking with the dead, but in challenging the boundaries of conventional thought and inviting us to consider realities beyond the narrow confines of scientific materialism. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the subscribe button